My fraud story involves a just shy of $10 million loss that was suffered by a large multinational organization over a period of about 15 years. It was perpetrated by a single employee and a contractor that they'd retained in the mid-90s to provide janitorial and facilities products to the organization's U.S. headquarters. This was a campus of about 4 or 5 buildings, large offices and manufacturing sites within a few miles of one another. After some time, the contractor began to perpetrate what was a fairly simple scheme in which he would overbill for products that were not delivered. Now, by the end of this fraud, a few years before it was discovered, he was billing the organization, on average, about $20,000 a week. This is for things like toilet paper, hand soap, vacuum bags. He was able to get away with this because he was engaged in an extramarital affair with the organization's facilities manager, who would rubber stamp these invoices in exchange for a relatively meager stipend, $200 a week to $2,000 a month. The primary factor that allowed this loss to occur and to go on for as long as it did was a near total lack of oversight. The employee responsible for facilitating this theft was a 34-year veteran, and she'd worked her way up from an administrative position out of college to the role of facilities manager. She was trusted and she was well liked, and when we spoke to her supervisor, it became pretty apparent that he had never reviewed any of the files that she'd approved, never conducted any kind of internal audit. It simply wasn't part of the process. Now, it's worth noting it would have been impossible for the organization even just to store the volume of materials that were being paid for. As an example, in 1 month, the contractor submitted invoices for approximately 240 light bulbs. Even if a cursory examination of the invoices had been completed at any point during the duration of this fraud, it would have been immediately apparent that something suspicious was going on. But there was a single point of contact for this, and she'd been compromised, and no one was checking. This loss was actually revealed to the organization when the FBI and the IRS approached them because the contractor was suspected of committing tax fraud. They reached out to inform the organization that they appeared to be the victim of a fraudulent billing scheme and indicated that these types of schemes typically involved an internal component. The organization conducted its own investigation and quickly identified the facilities manager. Now, prior to being contacted by law enforcement, they were completely unaware of this fraud, and there's no telling how long it would have been allowed to go on if law enforcement had not reached out to them. Almost any fraud can be identified with some basic oversight. The scheme was not particularly complex, and the theft totals were pretty egregious. I mean, if someone other than the involved employee had examined just a few months' worth of invoices at any time during the decade and a half that this fraud was going on, they would have at least questioned why the organization was paying through the nose for hundreds of light bulbs and pallets of toilet paper. This holds true for almost any organization, big or small. We've seen losses just like this one occurring at companies with only a single employee. Having some basic checks and balances in place, even just occasionally reviewing invoices for obvious red flags, will go a long way in protecting a business from fraud losses.